despite the unprecedented circumstances necessitating the level of reductions, this $92.2 billion approved budget provides significant support for education, the environment, infrastructure, child welfare, and more. And I would note that given Florida's population growth, it is a decline in per capita spending over last year's budgets. So while these actions total over $1 billion, roughly half of that is general revenue, half is trust fund balances. They will be set aside for whatever needs may arise in the coming year. Of the $1 billion in total vetoes, and I think this is important because everyone understands the circumstances have changed. When we did our budget back in the fall, we were operating under a certain set of assumptions. We always knew that we could see an economic downturn, but I don't think we necessarily forecast the economy simply stopping for a time. So we were operating under a certain set of assumptions. The legislature was as well. As the reality changes, I think we all have to recognize that none of us are going to get everything that we want. And so I thought it was important that I was stepping up to the plate on that as well. So of the $1 billion in vetoes, over $550 million are vetoes that I included in my governor's recommendations in the fall. And this includes vetoing the $20 million Job Growth Grant Fund, which is a great tool for a governor to have to be able to use. Of course, once the coronavirus pandemic hit, I stopped spending money out of the balance previously, so that's about a $25 million reversion, and then we're vetoing the $20 million for this year, which is something that's important. I want it, but at the same time, sometimes things just need to be put on pause. So we anticipate nearly $800 million of funds reverted by state agencies for the current fiscal year, bringing total unallocated general revenues for the next fiscal year to $2.3 billion. Florida's reserves are also bolstered by the Budget Stabilization Fund, which is about $1.7 billion, the Lawton Child's Endowment Fund, about $800 million, and $1.5 billion in unallocated trust fund balances. So in total, Florida stands with $6.3 billion in total reserves, which we may need to absorb the revenue losses that we have experienced due to COVID-19, while also leaving the state ready to weather any storm that the economic recovery may throw our way going forward. And that, of course, does not include federal dollars from the Federal CARES Act, which we have also used and will continue to use. When I announced my budget at the beginning or at the end of 2019 for the 2020 year, we focused primarily on a couple things, one of which was teacher salaries. We wanted to take Florida from the bottom half of the country in average minimum salary to the top 5. It was not an easy fight. There was a lot of folks that didn't want to do that, and I'm just pleased to say that we were able to get $500 million to increase the average minimum salary in the state of Florida for K through 12 teachers, as well as including money for salary increases for teachers who are more seasoned and other eligible personnel. So we are now in the top 5 for average minimum salary, and I think that this is really a historic achievement. I want to thank the members of the legislature who supported this really key initiative. We also have other key initiatives regarding K through 12, workforce, higher education, all trying to prepare our students for the future. We do have the highest funding ever for K through 12 schools with an increase of $137 per student. $100 million for mental health programs in our schools, which is a $25 million increase over last year's funding. An additional $22.8 million for a total of $1.3 billion in state operating funds for Florida's colleges, and an additional $44.4 million for a total of $2.7 billion for Florida's universities. And we did not increase tuition, which I think is very, very important. Budget also maintains important funding for practical skills-based education opportunities, including workforce initiatives and computer science education, $10 million to cover the cost of training and to provide bonuses to teachers who hold educator certificates or industry certifications in computer science, $10 million for the Pathways to Career Opportunities grant program to establish or expand pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs for high school and college students, $30 million for state colleges through the 2+2 Student Success Incentive Fund and Work Florida Student Success Incentive Fund to help students graduate on time and align career programs and workforce demands and high-wage job opportunities. One of the big initiatives of my first year in office was support for Florida's water resources and Everglades restoration. We sought $625 million to continue the momentum and the progress on those projects. Obviously, we were able to pass a couple very good water resources policy bills, which we will be signing very soon. But the money is important. Got to get the policy right, but you do need some funding. This budget continues the commitment that we made by allocating more than $625 million to restore the Everglades and protect our water resources. And this is 2 years in a row that the legislature has stepped up and really put their money into these key initiatives, and I think ways that the Floridians really appreciate. So we're looking at over $322 million for Everglades restoration, $50 million for springs restoration, $160 million for targeted water quality improvements, $40 million for alternative water supply, and $25 million to combat harmful algal blooms and red tide. We also have a budget that supports the mission of public safety. We are taking steps to fund innovative programs, safer correctional facilities, and evidence-based program for at-risk youth. Specifically, we have $2.3 million to implement the first statewide behavioral threat assessment strategy in the country, more than $54 million to provide a retention pay plan to correctional officers, correctional probation officers, and other security services personnel, $17.3 million to begin transitioning correctional officers from a 12-hour shift to an 8.5-hour shift, and $15 million to fund prevention programs for at-risk youth. We also understand the importance of infrastructure, particularly in a state that has added population. This budget fully funds the DOT work program at $9.2 billion. This is vital funding to increase infrastructure capacity, new highway construction, bridge repairs, and seaport, aviation, and transit program improvements. The budget also provides $145 million for workforce and affordable housing programs across the state to help working families meet basic housing needs. And of course, this is in addition to the $250 million just announced this week to address affordable housing needs due to the economic downturn caused by COVID-19. So that total amount is more than what was in my budget or what was in the enacted or the legislature's Appropriations Act. The budget puts Florida families first and helps some of our most vulnerable populations. We have an increase in funding for child welfare, over $53 million, to effectuate important reforms to our system to enhance provider accountability and the quality of care a child receives. We've also made it a priority to fight against the national opioid epidemic and substance abuse in general. The budget includes more than $138 million in state and federal funding for the opioid epidemic, another $8 million to continue providing community-based behavioral health services. We also have $8.7 million in new funding to support the Office of Public and Professional Guardianship to help ensure the legal rights of older Floridians are protected and eliminate abuse, neglect, and exploitations of our elderly population. Further, the budget contains more than $97 million to fund the Agency for Persons with Disabilities waiver program that affords people with developmental disabilities the ability to live, learn, and work in their communities. These were difficult circumstances. Had the legislative session been a late session this year, the budget that the legislature produced probably would have looked different than the one that it did, given that the budget was produced right on the cusp of the economic dislocations wrought by the coronavirus pandemic. But I want people to know, particularly those in the legislature, there are obviously things that I vetoed that I think could be good policy. There are specific projects in there that under normal circumstances I would have supported. Obviously, I vetoed some of my own key initiatives. But I think that these steps are necessary in order to make sure that we are still on a stable fiscal foundation. as we get into next year, some of the things that didn't make the cut, if we're looking at a healthier outcome or a healthier progression, then obviously I think we will see a lot of this stuff be back in play. So I appreciate the hard work that folks in the legislature did over these many months. These were not easy decisions, but at the end of the day, I think we threaded the needle by preserving some of the historic achievements that this session wrought, such as the teacher pay increase, such as the environmental funding, while also realizing the historic and necessary savings that you have to do in these types of fiscal situations. And so I want to thank everyone for their efforts. And I signed the bill before I came out today, and it should be disseminated to the public very soon if it hasn't already. And with that, I'm happy to take some questions. Michael?
If I might have you, the state's burned up about a third of its reserves and about half of its unemployment trust fund today, as of today. Why didn't you make deeper cuts?
Well, look, nobody has ever made more vetoes than I did right here. I don't think they've ever vetoed $1 billion. It's a huge part of the actual budget as well in terms of the general revenue. So we did an awful lot, but we also look and see we have unallocated money that's left over. Obviously the vetoes, obviously budget stabilization. We're going to do agency holdback, which we think will be $750 million. We have different reserves, and then we also have Federal CARES Act dollars. So I'm convinced that we'll be able to, to weather the storm and do it right.
Did you veto the state worker pay raise?
I did not. I approved it. The pay raise, obviously that was packaged with a bunch of things, including the contributions to the pension system. We want to continue to do that as well. And we were able to make the numbers work. And look, a lot of people have worked very hard over these last 3 or 4 months. I mean, it's been a lot. I know many of our key agencies have been working around the clock. So I thought it was merited. And I wouldn't have done it if we couldn't make the numbers work, but I think we made them work. Yes, sir.
What is Florida not getting from the federal government you think we could use? There's been discussion about a second CARES Act package that might be passed in the late summer or early fall. What more does Florida need?
Well, look, I think that if they do some type of assistance to the states, I think it'll be what I've told them is, we were in good shape, but I mean, any issue we had or any state had pre-existing the pandemic, that's not appropriate to do. But if you do look at the loss of revenue, unfortunately, we haven't lost as much as I think was initially predicted. I think it'll be for this fiscal year. The predictions were a lot higher. I think we're going to be even under $2 billion in terms of the last few months. So, but I think that lost revenue is something that was a result of the national policy in terms of how to do the pandemic. And so if they want to deal with that, obviously I would be supportive of doing it. But I definitely do not think that they should do any pre-existing problem we had before that. We need to figure that out on our own. I don't have the exact number, off the top of my head. I mean, there were some provider increases that we approved, and there were some that we went ahead and said that we'll wait till next year. I mean, some of them had already. It was a mix in terms of that bucket.
Restrictions on affordable housing, you would want to touch that trust fund. Some of the trust fund money has been diverted into other areas now.
It's not been diverted. So we did the $250 million from the CARES, which is kind of the because I really believe pretty much any economic hardship right now is going to be tied to this pandemic. I mean, it's pervasively affected our economy. So I think that's going to allow them to do what we would have wanted to do in some instances, but I think that was good. And then the sale program was approved, and so that'll help produce more low-income housing. So you end up having more money than was actually in the budget. And so the sale or the ship is a reversion back for the balance, but it's not necessarily being spent on anything else. It's trying to save it.
Governor, can I follow up on that budget? You got a 6.2% hike in federal Medicaid funds. So did you reduce any of the general revenue that was in the state budget in the Medicaid area, given the fact that you got more federal Medicaid money?
Well, I mean, not in signing the budget. I mean, but I think we're looking at the increases that we're getting in terms of the FMAP will take some pressure off the general revenue going forward. And yeah, we definitely anticipate that for sure.
So you did not veto any general revenue in the Medicaid budget?
I don't think so. Yeah, no, I don't think we did. Yep. Yes, sir.
It's about a license law, the panic alarm bill. There was an $8 million appropriation for that. Do you know if that survived the vetoes?
I think it was approved, correct? Yeah, it was approved. Yep.
Did you tell us?
We did support the nursing home rate increases. Yep. I mean, that's been the ground zero for dealing with the pandemic, and it's been tough. And we've obviously provided the bulk of our efforts, or at least a major part of our efforts, have been support those institutions. And so I thought that it was, particularly right now, I thought it made a lot of sense to support that.
So, Governor, you talked a lot about what you preserved in the budget, including education and environmental programs. But can you go into more detail about what you cut, and particularly your own priorities?
So we cut the Job Growth Grant Fund. We did the Universities of Distinction, which is kind of a new program to not the performance, that the preeminence funding, which UF and FSU was kind of a new thing. Not the worst idea in the world, but now was not the time to do it. We vetoed a big courthouse for the second DCA that was supposed to go in Pinellas County. Obviously, we mentioned the SHIP. So, you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars from some of the bigger ticket items, and then a lot of the smaller projects. One of the things people will look at when they go through, last year, if you remember, we obviously wanted the major water initiatives, and I think those were very important, but I also approved a whole host of really local, more parochial water stuff. And I mean, I like a lot of those projects. Obviously, the local communities have a responsibility in some of that as well. We looked in the stuff that was not in the BMAP, and a lot of those didn't make the cut. Again, I think some of them are good, but we just had to figure out, okay, what's the priority? So those are things that, if the situation improves, then we'll take a look at it next year.
Governor,
Sir.
can I get your reaction to the city of Jacksonville imposing a mask requirement?
So we've, advised from the beginning of May about situations where that would be appropriate, but we've left it to the locals to make decisions about whether they want to use coercive measures or impose any type of criminal penalties. We're not going to do that statewide, but, we've wanted to have a collaborative effort with the locals from the beginning. Different areas have handled this differently based on their facts and circumstances, and even today, you see obviously discrepancies throughout the state in terms of the course of the pandemic. So we've worked very closely with Jacksonville, just as we've worked with the folks in South Florida and others, and we're going to continue to do that and support efforts that they think are appropriate in their given jurisdictions. Thanks, everybody. What's that?
Is that going to change anything on having a convention there? Or
Well, we're just focused on the budget. We're focusing on this. I'm not